Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, week 2 of COP26 has been taking place in Glasgow this week, with a focus on limiting the damage done by global warming and compensating the world's most vulnerable countries. I'll be discussing the details of the loss and damage financing put forward by the most industrialised nations with our business correspondent Simon Pusey, who'll be joining me in the studio. I'll also be speaking with climate activist and self-proclaimed eco-feminist Adenike Oladosu, who's been sitting on a number of panels at the conference over the past few days, lending her voice to the debate regarding gender inequalities that exist within the climate emergency. And Emma Revel, an external affairs advisor at the British Retail Consortium, will be speaking to me about some of the hurdles that British retailers are facing in the run-up to Christmas. It's just 6 weeks away. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest company news stories of the week. But first, as always, let's start the show with business news from here in the UK. Britain's opposition Labour Party has called on the government's anti-sleaze watchdog to investigate a former Conservative cabinet minister amid claims he misused his parliamentary office to carry out legal work. The former Attorney General, Sir Geoffrey Cox, has earned more than £800,000 for his work with law firm Withers, which is representing the British Virgin Islands government in a corruption case brought by the UK. The accusations come amid a fresh focus on MP's second jobs following the Owen Paterson lobbying scandal. In other British business news, the second week of COP26 has focused on compensating the most vulnerable nations from the harm that climate change is already causing them and for future damage which is likely to occur. African leaders are seeking to negotiate a finance deal that would channel $700 billion every year from 2025. But there are already fears that this is unattainable, as rich countries have historically been hesitant to commit to the pledges.
We say we need action, but for them, what they want to be politically correct, do some announcement, do some engagement. But after the COP, you will try to find something in the field, nothing. This is the main issue we are facing. And even if they put some money in the table or in the box, be sure that the mechanisms of access to the funds are really difficult.
Well, earlier I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for some analysis. Simon, lots of focus this week on loss and damage. What are some of the big pledges that have come out of Glasgow?
Yeah, well, let's start with the main one. I think it's net zero, 130 countries signing up to reach net zero by 2050. But among them, there are some people that are missing out. China and India and Russia are the main ones, but also Nigeria have promised to do it by 2060, and South Africa is the only African country to promise to do it by 2050. Deforestation, another big one. More than 100 countries promising to end deforestation by 2030. 24 African countries have signed up to that. But I think the main thing that we've been seeing over the last couple of days at least has been the financing of things. Rishi Sunak saying that he wants the global economy to switch to more of a sustainable one. And there's a general recognition that the $100 billion per year to developing countries, of which many are African, isn't really enough. And that hasn't even been met itself. I think it's only 80% of that that's being met per year from developed countries. So at the summit, the chair of the African group of negotiators said that African countries need $700 billion every year from 2025. And it's not just Africa. India are demanding $1 trillion as soon as possible to help it move away from its fossil fuels. Mark Carney, the UN Special Envoy, has put net zero financing globally at around $100 trillion. So that's the scale of what's needed from these developed countries. But there's a reason for that, and that's because the climate problem is obviously mainly created in Europe and in Asia and in America, and it's the southern hemisphere that's really suffering. So it's African countries and it's Pacific island nations that are really struggling. And a lot of these countries, a lot of African countries especially, are reliant on fossil fuels, on coal, on gas. And so that's why this money is needed for countries, and that's why that $700 billion stimulus package was asked for. or by 2025. Let's focus on South Africa because it's the biggest source of carbon emissions in Africa. At the summit, it was announced it will receive £8.5 billion from the United States and the EU to help it ditch coal, which is its main power source. And everyone knows really that coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel out there. So that's and also worth mentioning that South Africa didn't sign up to the coal pledge that has been announced, and that's obviously because it's so reliant on coal. Also important to mention China, and especially China within Africa, because a lot of these new coal power stations and a lot of power stations that are being built in Africa, or even planned to be built in Africa, have come from financing from China. Often it's China that's completely behind it. So China announced before COP26 that it will no longer build new coal-fired power stations overseas, and that'll have a big effect on Africa. For example, there was huge new coal plants that were going to be built in Kenya, Madagascar, Cote d'Ivoire. Those all won't happen now. So I think it's those kind of financing things and those projects that were planned or are currently ongoing, which if those changes, that'll have a big effect on net zero and on cutting emissions. But unfortunately, it looks like it's still not enough. And the Climate Action Tracker, a report by them, says the planet is still heading towards 2.4 Celsius of warming. Obviously, COP26 was set up to try and reach 1.5, so there's still lots more things that need to happen. And everyone's talking about working together, but the problem is each country has very specific, difficulties or challenges or ambitions for their own people. And African countries are no different. Very reliant on gas and coal, and the developed nations, it's up to them to provide that financing so that they can steer away and have a more sort of sustainable energy targets.
Thank you, Simon. Staying with COP26, during Tuesday's Gender Day, the British government announced £165 million to tackle climate change while addressing the inequalities that make women and girls more vulnerable to the warming planet. According to the UN, women and children can comprise 80% of those displaced by climate-related disasters. Climate activist and self-proclaimed eco-feminist Adenike Oladosu has been present at many of these discussions taking place at the conference, and she joins me now from Glasgow. Adenike Oladosu, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I've got to say I was so excited to speak to you because you really are a phenomenal woman. There are so many climate activists across the world, not just Greta Thunberg. Nigeria has our own. So I'm definitely waving the flag and celebrating all of your success. Of course, that success has been picked up, which is why you're speaking to us from Glasgow. I know you had a really prominent position when it comes to speaking about some of the gender inequalities. So I want to start this discussion by asking you how some of the gender inequalities around the climate change discussion affect women, will disproportionately affect women, especially women in Nigeria that are living in vulnerable locations.
Thank you so much. And it's very well pronounced that climate change is now a gender issue and needs a gender smart approach in addressing all of these crises. And one of it is channeling finance at the center of this, because we have seen that over time in the place where I'm from, that we see women trekking distance, kilometers to get cooking water, to get firewood, which are unsustainable. And all of these time constraints really affect their environmental practices and conservation efforts or indigenous knowledge for them to be able to add in tackling the climate change crisis. And we also know that land acquisition is limited or restricted for women due to social and traditional barriers, which is definitely affecting food security. And because women are responsible for 60 to 80% of food production. So you could imagine if women are given the access to own full rights to a land, then it's going to help to reduce food insecurity, tackle climate change, poverty, and different inequalities that we have. So that is why we want the world leaders to do more in centering women and girls in the center for change, to see that they have access to land, to education, to other basic resources, such as even energy, because they have to trek distance to get firewood, which are unsustainable. So once they have all of these things, those time constraints will be reduced for them to be able to add to economic gain and to also help to become a change makers in their various communities. So I'm standing here as a Nigerian youth delegate on gender-related issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Adenike. Do you think Nigeria are ready to have these conversations?
Yeah, definitely. It's a gender. We have gender action plans, so it's one of those steps. And so we also have to call on other countries to do the same thing, because when one country has one plan and the rest of the whole world or the other countries doesn't have the same plan, it might not make a strong addition to what we are fighting for. And that is why organizations like CARE International could bring global voice like me to also channel our voices to be heard in such a place here in COP26. And also being a Nigerian delegate on gender-related issues is something that is worth knowing, that the world has to change to see women and girls as change makers and not survival strategy as a child bride, using it in the harsh weather condition. And that is why we need gender sensitive lens in addressing the defining issue of our time, like the climate change crisis.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Adenike, and I'm sure lots of our viewers will too. You've described yourself as an eco-feminist. What does that mean?
Yeah, an ecofeminist to me, I believe in a world where women should have a safe place to exercise their rights without any form of injustice, because right now what we are seeing is the increase in child brides, increase in violence against women, sexually abused, and this is more common when women are displaced or in the informal sectors, affecting them. So we have to build resilience with the informal sectors in order for us to be able to have a gender-smart society where women could be contributors and where women could also have a voice and be heard and be in a safe place.
Absolutely. Let's take the conversation a little bit wider, if we can, Adenike. Of course, there have been so many specific themes set out in week 2. We had Gender Day. Of course, on Monday, a lot was speaking about climate finance, and African leaders are hoping to negotiate to receive $700 billion each year from 2025 to kind of mitigate against global warming and also sweep up a lot of the mess that industrialised nations have caused. What are your thoughts on this? Is it going to be enough to just hand out cash?
Yeah, it's, there's a lot to be done, because I keep wondering why 2025? And what happens to the agreement of 2009 that was supposed to be $100 billion annually? What happens to the agreement? Then why another new one when you haven't even redeemed the former ones? Climate finance centers among everything that Nigeria needs and other African countries needs to transit to a cleaner energy source. So it's very important that we try not to postpone climate action into the future, because that is the most dangerous thing to do. 2025 is too far for a country like Nigeria that we need to keep tackling climate change every now and then. So it's a good plan, but we need to do more. We need to see that $100 it's becoming a reality, and everything is being paid to the developed country right from 2009. And even with that, with the $900 billion, it's still not even enough to tackle the crisis right now at stake, because we need to build resilience with our infrastructures and the rest. So we need much more finance. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well said, Adenike Oladosu. Thank you so much for joining us on Channels Business Global. Hopefully, on your way back to Nigeria, you'll be flying through London and you can come and sit with us in the studio and talk to us once again. I think Nigerians can rest assured that at least we've got our own Greta Thunberg flying the flag and making sure that all of these pledges are turned to action. Thank you so much, Adenike, for joining us on the show. Thank you. Coming up on Channels Business Global, with just 6 weeks left until Christmas, I'll be speaking with Emma Revel, an external affairs advisor at the British Retail Consortium, about how the UK retailers are gearing up for a festive season that is likely to be scarred by labour shortages and rising inflation. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking with Emma Revel, an external affairs advisor at the British Retail Consortium. But before then, here's some company news for you. India's digital payment startup Paytm has launched the country's biggest IPO with a target of $2.46 billion. This would surpass Coal India's $2 billion issue in 2010. The firm, founded almost 10 years ago, is backed by Jack Ma's Ant Group, Japan's SoftBank and Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. According to a regulatory filing in July, the platform has over 114 million active users, and the group undertook transactions worth more than $54 billion in the 2020-2021 financial year. Tesla chief Elon Musk has sold around $5 billion of shares in the electric car maker, just a few days after he asked his Twitter followers whether he should sell a 10% stake. 3.5 million votes were cast, with 58% voting in favour of him selling. The sell equates to about 3% of Musk's total holdings. It's his first sales of shares since 2016. The stock sank 12% on Tuesday, but recovered 4.3% the following day. Uber has raised fares by 10% for London passengers in an attempt to encourage drivers back onto the app. The last time Uber raised its base pricing was in 2017. It comes after thousands of drivers are thought to have quit the ride-hailing firm during the pandemic because of an absence of support. The shortage has led to a surge pricing and long wait times. Australia's unemployment rate has unexpectedly surged to 5.2%. This is despite the end of lockdowns in Sydney and Melbourne. According to data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the rate is at the highest level since April, when 5.5% of the labour force were without work. The Australian dollar eased to a one-month low against the US dollar in the wake of the report's release, as investors pared back expectations of an early move by the Reserve Bank of Australia to raise interest rates. Virgin Galactic has sold around 100 tickets since Sir Richard Branson flew to space. The current price of the fare is $450,000. Sir Richard's company hopes to begin its first commercial space flights at the end of next year. Established in 2004, Virgin Galactic is seeking to cash in on the success of its high-profile test mission in the summer, which beat Blue Origin owner Jeff Bezos to space by just 9 days. About 600 people have tickets from the earlier round of sales, when prices were at a much lower $200,000. Data from the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers has revealed that car sales have plunged 9.4% year-on-year during the month of October. The prolonged global shortage of semiconductors has significantly disrupted production in the world's biggest car market. Dubai-based carrier Emirates Airline has posted a 6-month loss of $1.6 billion, compared with $3.4 billion loss during the same period last year. Year-on-year, revenue is up 86%, and passenger numbers have risen 319% to 6.1 million. The financial results come ahead of next week's Dubai Air Show, where Emirates is expected to discuss its delayed 777X order with Boeing. According to bosses, momentum began to accelerate over the summer and continues to grow steadily into the winter season and beyond. NYC Coin Mining has launched in New York City after the city's mayor-elect, Eric Adams, vowed to build a crypto-friendly city as soon as he takes office in January. Following his victory last week, Adams announced on Twitter that he would take his first 3 paychecks as mayor in Bitcoin in response to a similar commitment by Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. Versions of the Citycoin project have already been launched in Miami, Florida and in Austin, Texas, with an aim to unite cryptocurrency players across the city to promote its technological development. Now to our next topic. UK retail sales accelerated last month despite logistics issues hurting the consumer electronics segment. While the number of shoppers is still down on pre-pandemic levels, footfall is also rising. Beleaguered retailers are hoping this momentum will continue in the run-up to Christmas, but with significant supply shortages and rising inflation, the latest data could be just a flash in the pan. Well, for more analysis, I'm now being joined by Emma Revel, an external affairs advisor at the British Retail Consortium. Emma, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Well, despite some of the dreary, gloomy headlines we've had over the past couple of weeks, according to your latest data, footfall is heading back in the UK. In fact, it shows that we're doing much stronger than our European counterparts. What do you think's driving this?
Well, it's a combination of factors. Obviously, retail was open much earlier in the year, but we've had a full summer now of retail reopening, which is fantastic. There will obviously be an uptick with big sort of shopping events, like a lot of people shopping in August and September for the children going back to school, everyone needing new uniforms, pencil cases, all that kind of thing. People are obviously also spending on big ticket items and a lot of investment in the home DIY type things as an alternative to spending on a summer holiday. So a lot of families who didn't feel able to travel over the summer may have decided to head to the high streets and spend their money there instead.
Absolutely, consumer habits have changed. I know that from what's been happening in my household, but of course we can't get away from some of the facts. Rising inflation, supply shortages, labour shortages. I know M&S surprised all of their investors by lifting their profit forecast earlier in the week. But, you know, these concerns are likely to hamper festive period shopping. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think people are quite rightly concerned because a lot of these issues are in the news and adding pressure to prices. You know, retailers, 3 in 5 retailers have said to us they expect to have to raise prices ahead of Christmas. But retailers are working incredibly hard to make sure that everything that people prioritise over Christmas, whether that's Christmas food or toys and gifts, will be on the shelves. So a lot of people are actually bringing forward their Christmas spending as well. They're shopping earlier, which helps them spread out the costs of Christmas spending. So it's a mixed picture, and people are concerned, but retailers are doing everything they can to make sure that, you know, things do get on the shelves, even though we have these supply chain issues to try and overcome.
Absolutely. Lobby groups like the British Retail Consortium and others have been trying to get the government to, you know, do away with these ancient business rates. I know the Chancellor is mulling over a digital tax levy to try and even out the competition. What other things can be done to kind of breathe some life back into the beleaguered high street?
Well, yeah, as you say, government has a lot of different funds, whether it's the Future High Streets Fund or the Towns Fund that different communities can bid for to breathe life back into the high streets. Business rates are, of course, an incredibly big part, a big factor in business decisions. I think about 80% of businesses have said that if business rates are not significantly reformed, they will have to look at closing businesses because of how expensive they are. There was some movement on that in the budget, some reliefs that were offered, but because there's a cap in the amount of money that can be saved, it's not particularly helpful for big businesses. So while the government may have closed its fundamental review into business rates, it is unfortunately that is the biggest area that can help shops on the high street to continue to serve their communities.
Clearly. Before I let you go, Emma, I've got to ask, are you expecting Christmas to, be at what it was pre-pandemic, December 2019? Will we expect those big numbers?
I don't like to make those predictions, I'm not sure, but I think one factor that will play into this is the fact that quite a lot of families, including my own, didn't have the kind of normal Christmas in 2020. I wasn't able to travel, people weren't able to have big get-togethers. So I think that will drive some additional spending this year as people try and make up for the Christmases they didn't have in 2020.
Absolutely. Emma Revel, External Affairs Advisor at the British Retail Consortium. Thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Thanks, Emma. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.